Hi there, Thomas Documentary 2015. My name is Dave Malinsky. I'll be 26 in a couple weeks. I live in New York City. And now, as to the last point, a few sentences about why I love Thomas so much. It's going to be a bit longer than that, unfortunately. I'll try to keep this as short and sweet as I can. But let me ask you a question, actually. Could you possibly send more information about this documentary? Because I'm a documentary playwright. I've researched, written, and performed a one-man play based on a very poorly known topic about theater in New York in the 1770s and 80s during the American Revolution. And I'm currently a freelance historian and theater artist, and I guess educator. And I consider my membership in this fandom as integral to that, even if it seems completely unrelated. So that leads me to the question: what's your story and background? I'm very interested. Because what really got me interested and kept me interested in the whole Thomas franchise, even up till now, is well, look, I was born in '88. That was when it came over to the United States through, Shining Time Station. I was into it. I grew out of it, as one does. But then I got back into it when I was, I think, about 16, like 2006 or so. That's when I found the online Thomas fandom, the Soder Island fan site, where I eventually got in touch with Ryan Healy, who sent me the information about this documentary. And I told him that I need to do this. Now, since you have been in touch with him and since you've engaged him as a consultant, I'm just curious as to how much you know and how much research you've done. Because since you've even gone to the trouble of contacting him, and I'm wondering if you've even spent time on the Soder Island fan site and on Martin Clutterbuck and Jim Frazier's Real Life of Thomas and others. The fact is, and I've discovered this, you have actually done more background research than not just Slate Magazine, who did a hit piece in, I think, 2008, more so than The Guardian, and even, and I was very surprised to find this out, more so than the academic journal Children's Literature and Education. That was the only academic journal to even look at Thomas and Friends in the late 80s. And even then, that research frankly, it was flawed. It was flawed. As a trained historian myself, I can say that research was flawed. And I can say that because thanks to my engagement with the Soder Island community, which I make it sound so professional, and in some ways it isn't, but in many ways it is. We're a tiny community. Tiny. You might be tempted to compare us to the Bronies. We're nothing compared to them in terms of numbers, and yet the quality of work we've done in terms of research, in terms of what I'd say consumer advocacy, I possibly charity, I'm not an expert on that, but certainly on creative output, has certainly rivaled that much larger and I'd say even less maligned community. People know who the Bronies are and what they do. No one even knows who we are. which I guess is fine. And yet, if you've done all the research, you would know that our thing, Thomas and Friends, has actually had a greater impact on the real world than a lot of other things, which is surprising. I mean, what? Talking trains? What? How is that meaningful? And that's a mistake that most people make. That's a mistake that, Slate, The Guardian, and Children's Literature and Education made. That's the mistake that this documentary on children's literature illustrations made. And I would argue, and I think other people would agree with me, that is the mistake that Britt Allcroft ultimately made, and it was her undoing with the release of the awful movie Tom's the Magic Riddler in 1999, and it caused near irreparable damage to the brand that only now is starting to be repaired. And it's actually thanks to this community that we've built up amongst ourselves that I was proud to be a part of, even though I was mainly involved as a creative person. It was, I think, through the efforts of the community that change happened at all. And that's why I want to thank you so much for what you're doing. Because you're telling a story that, had you not intervened, would most likely be completely forgotten. And I know this, sincerely, but let me go back to when I first found the SIF in 2006, early high school. Everyone's trying to find their identity, and I just so happened to find mine. 16 years old, talking trains. Who cares? My main interest was history in school. Those were my best classes. I was genuinely interested because history is ultimately about stories and what a historian's role is. And I'm sure you'd know, as documentarians, is to tell the untold stories. And what I discovered was that, sure, the quote-unquote story of Thomas the Tank Engine had been told, or so I believed. But actually, the more I looked into the work that SIF had done, and just chronicling the history of this, big, kids business multimedia franchise, other than Brian Sibley's biography of Audrey that is now well out of print, that I own a copy of, which I'm very proud to show you. One moment, please. This guy here, this story would be lost to history. And that's why I kind of made it my mission to do that, not just with the Thomas stuff, which you guys are so... I want to say you guys are brave for doing it, I guess. But I don't think any of us in our community would have the balls to do what you're doing. So yeah, I joined SIF in 2006. That's where I met Ryan Healy and pretty much everyone else in the community. And I got involved first. I joined the forum. Then I got involved as in various ways a voice artist, which actually turned out really well, and I'm now doing it in various capacities now. Also as an essayist. So I've linked to you my essays with the SIF that I wrote for them. Also, I got involved in this parody series, which I just find so hilarious. And obviously, I made great friends, great communities. I'm so proud to be a member of this community. And I hope I've made them proud because it is through being a part of these people who are telling an untold story that I was inspired to do what I do, which is taking untold historical stories and bring them to life through theater, which I have done and which I'm showing you now. So ultimately, through these works, meetings, and discussions, this community, I decided to go to York first in 2010 for study abroad, then again in 2011 to 2013 as a master's student at the University of York, which is, I think, like just below Oxbridge. I don't want to brag or anything. York's an amazing city. What's in York, in fact, is the National Railway Museum. And I think it'd be good for you to get in touch with them. Also mention me because I was a volunteer there. And in fact, Chris Eden Green has done filming there, and everyone our community in the SI community, we've been there. But notably, in 2012, part of this program was work on adaptations, and a lot of this stuff was a lot of theoretical work. And what blew my mind was that there were two completely separate intellectual strands. There's one field of adaptation studies. There's an Oxford Journal of Adaptation. There's another field number of academic works looking at nostalgia. And there's another that's completely separate that looks at childhood media. And from all the work done at the SOTO community, I knew that, wow, Thomas actually covers all these separate strands. But no one had connected them. And so I decided to write a paper on it. I don't know if you guys know much about the UK education system. I had to learn it while I was there because I trained in the United States. But I wrote an essay. It wasn't a dissertation, but someone could write a dissertation on this, and I kind of want to be that person, to be honest. And this is what came out of it. I'm sending it to you in this email, and if you want, I can do a recording of it, and just have the images there as visuals, because there are some visual aids. And as far as and to make my point perfectly clear, and hopefully to give you guys an understanding, here is my bibliography, and again, this is all that's here. Here we go. This is all that's here. The Soder Island fan site, Audrey's biography, several things at the archives at the National Railway Museum, which I'm sure you guys will be checking out. And and hopefully you guys will add to this. Finally, in 2012, Ryan and the rest of the SF community honored me as a VIP, which was I can't even begin to say what honor that was. I mean, it's more just, yes, I'm a member of the community, and hopefully with that essay, which, I mean, look, it's a bit rough around the edges, I admit, but I hope that, I don't know who you guys are in contact with in terms of your experts, But please do contact the University of York Department of Theater, Film, and Television. I can send you contact information for the leadership there. Mention me. I don't know if they'll remember the work I did with them. But it could actually be very helpful if you're looking for experts. Because I don't know if you've found this out yet, but the fact is, there is very little academic expertise regarding the whole Thomas franchise. It's paltry. And the fandom, that's what we're doing. That's what drew me into it. That's what kept me there. If it was just silly kid stuff, I wouldn't be there. I don't think a lot of the people who are there now would. I don't think any of the people who are using that as a base to create their own work, that they would be there either. Excuse me. So sorry, I lost my train of thought. I don't know how much of the history you know, how much of the history you're going to uncover. For all I know, we've already found it all. From my limited perspective, Ryan probably has a much more complete perspective than I do. But that's what Thomas means to me. That's what I love about it. The fact that this thing I loved as a kid, it's not just the product of a 1980s marketing team. It's just not. And ironically, when Britt Allcroft thought like that, as she clearly did, she caused damage to the brand. I mean, look, I'm not a protector of the brand, goodness knows. I'm just a fan. But, of course, fandom isn't just, adulation. It is curation. And I'm honored to do my part for that. In your request, how do I put it? I'm just going to ask you one thing, that you remember the most important thing. And if you do, you will be righting a historical wrong. I'm not, maybe I am being a bit hyperbolic here. I don't think I am, but that's because, I'm a historian. And as documentarians, I assume you're seekers of truth. But there's just one critical mistake I beg you not to make. Pretty much, let me put this a bit closer. Stepney the Bluebell Engine, I think it came out in, I want to say 1963. The first book illustrated by Governor and Peter Edwards. And frankly, one of the most important pieces of the whole franchise, really. And this really encapsulates everything. But it also shows the mistake that everyone, pretty much everyone who's looked at Thomas, including Britt Allcroft, made. You might be tempted to focus on the faces. I beg you, please do not fall into that temptation. any. I mean, that the faces aren't new. They're really not. They'd been done before. They'll be done after. That's. To focus on the faces is to entirely miss the point. It is. What makes Thomas special, why I love it, and why I think so many others love it, is everything else. Everything except the faces. Because they're real. They're real. Stepney is real. Duck, actually, Duck is dead. Actually, it's a bit of a joke. That the engine with that number actually was scrapped. But of course, the Great Western Railway is real. That engine type is real. That diesel is real too. The conflict that ultimately would be the main source in the Railway series, both the replacement of steam engines with diesel engines, that was a real thing. And this piece of children's literature was commenting on it. Likewise, the development of the steam preservation movement, that seen by Stepney here, and of course a whole other set of books, that was real too. Wilbur Awdry was personally involved in it. And yet, that history has been pretty much forgotten. And it's only in the past year that things have really started to change, at least in hit entertainment. In fact, it was this book and the reasoning behind it. That's what really drew me into this, and it's kept me here ever since. I want to say 2006, 2007. And hopefully, ultimately what led to, one moment, this, the collection of Christopher Awdry's books, which I had never known about as an American, because they were never released in the United States. At least I don't think they were. There's a whole story there that's not been looked into either. But to me, the medium basically became the message. Look, if you look at the Railway Series books, at least Wilbur Awdry's Railway Series books, especially starting with like the 11th one, I write about this. If the mistake that everyone makes, again, Awdry and Mitton made this mistake too, was that the individual stories of the Railway Series of Thomas and Friends matter. And that's just not the case. It's just not the case. Ask, say, a comic book geek. And I'm sure, I'm not, so I can't vouch for this, but I'm sure they tell you that it's not the individual issues that matter. It's the piece as a whole. The storylines, the comic book line, the world building. In fact, I write that yes, the Railway Series books should be considered literature, and that they haven't is just very sad. But also that, yeah, they're really more like comic books. And of course, they were popularized around the same time with modern multimedia. And that this hasn't been looked into by anyone except the fandom. And you now. And I can't thank you enough again. It's an embarrassment for academia and geek culture. And journalists too, because they haven't looked at it either. And when they do it through the lens of critical theory, which is useful, But like I said, if you focus on the faces, you're missing the point. This has gotten very long, and I apologize. And here's my final point. What I found so fascinating is what makes Thomas different. I mean, as a franchise, different from, say Winnie the Pooh, is that yes, the commercialization happened, but there was still the heritage. You go to a bookstore now, A. Milne's books are still prominently displayed. Yeah, Winnie the Pooh is a pawn of the Disney Empire, but, the origins are still maintained. You don't... I'm pretty sure there is a Winnie the Pooh fandom curation, whatever. But if they disappeared, I'm sure the heritage would still happen. If our community, if Sword Island forums, if Ryan Healy, Simon Martin, Eric Ryan, Jim Grattan, Martin Clutterbuck. I'm forgetting so many people. I'm sorry, but if we disappeared, this history could be lost. And of course, Wilbur Awdry and his son Christopher, they were doing the same thing with, steam railways. Why keep it around? It's history. Why keep the railway series around? I mean, people, all they care about is Thomas and Friends anyway. That's what makes the money. You keep the railway series around the same reason you keep steam engines around. History exists. It matters. Stories matter. No matter what people say, even all the dark stuff, even the stuff that people rightfully don't like, you acknowledge it. It's there. If you don't, terrible mistakes can be made. And they have been made. Our jobs as seekers and recorders of truth, whether artists, documentarians, historians, teachers, whatever, is to ensure that the truth is known. By creating this documentary, you are adding to that. I cannot thank you enough. Thank you.